She was trying to decide if she was going to just live out the rest of her life on her own terms without seeking treatment, or if she was going to take a step back and get treatment at a time when it was really expensive and it wasn't that, reliable. And as she was struggling with that, she wrote a sentence in her journal. She wrote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare." And out of that sentence, and I have a whole lecture about this. I won't go into it,
Yeah.
but what happened over time is that sentence was so impactful in the lives of people who were caring for and advocating for other people that they would repeat it again and again to remind themselves that they needed care too. And in the end, that sentence got shortened to self-care. And that's how it entered our language.
Mm. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Spotlight Houston, where we bring you the best of the people, places, and events in Greater Houston. This week, we sat down with Dr. Sean Fitzpatrick, psychotherapist and executive director of the Jung Center, to discuss how we can cope with stress during the holiday season and how we take care of our mental health. This is episode 114 with an original air date of Monday, December 2nd, 2024. Spotlight Houston is brought to you by Story Zone Media. And now here's your host, Blanca Quezada.
Hi. Hope you all are getting ready for the holidays. I know I am. As I've said before, the holidays are my favorite time of the year, but they can still be a little bit overwhelming for me. A lot of expectations and, of course, that budget that I got to think of and just a little bit of anxiety and trying to make sure that I'm also making my friends and my family happy. And there's just so much that everybody's expecting and that I'm expecting. And so, like I mentioned, it becomes a little overwhelming. And I realized that mental health is really, and it's something that we need to take care of year round. But a lot of times we forget or we don't know how to do that. And this time of the year, we definitely need to step back, take a deep breath, and think about it. So to me, it's about planning to really enjoy the fun season and not feeling so stressed out. But I need a little help trying to figure out how to do that. So I've invited Dr. Sean Fitzpatrick. He's a psychotherapist and executive director of the Jung Center to talk to us on how best we can take care of ourselves. And so thank you, Sean, for making the time from your very busy schedule, because I know you're very busy, to help us take care of our mental health during the holidays and really basically throughout the year so that we don't get overwhelmed, like I keep mentioning it, overwhelmed, and stay calm. And because for a lot of people, everybody's situation, of course, is different. And we may feel or have feelings of loneliness, sadness, stress, loss, depression, anxiety, maybe despair, and grief. And so instead of trying to, I can't say let go of all those feelings, but not think of them as much during this holiday season, what is it that we can do?
Well, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for having this conversation, which is really important. People do really suffer during the holidays. It's one of the shadows of this season is that we are often reminded of losses that we've experienced. We encounter family members or loved ones whose lives have taken them down different paths or have set them up with different ways of seeing the world than we do. And there can be a lot of conflict and pain and struggle that goes along with that. So your question's a very big one, but I think an important one. I'll just start by saying the very first thing that we can do at any time, I would double down on it for the holidays,
Yeah.
is to breathe, to make room in our schedules for our own needs. One of the things I noticed, Blanca, as you were reflecting about the holidays was you were talking about wanting to make sure that you made your loved ones happy, right? And that is I think a part of this time of year is whether comes from the gift giving. This is often a part of this time of year, regardless of what tradition you might be part of, if you have a religious tradition, or the desire to draw people together and eat together, have communal experiences. It can involve a lot of work and a lot of turning yourself over to the needs of other people. And so the very first thing we need to do is to make sure that we are getting what we need along the way. And so breathing is the simplest technique I think that we have. Of course, it's not a technique, it's something that's natural and happening all the time. And it's more about drawing your attention into your breath,
Yeah.
pausing long enough to note, and then the next step is to be aware. So be aware of what's actually happening to you in your body as
Yeah.
you're trying to navigate all of
Yeah.
the conflicting commitments and to-do lists that you have and so on. It's
And
really starting with yourself and noticing what you're actually feeling.
yeah. And that's normally what I do. I sit back and just kind of think about things first, relax, and then make a choice. Make the
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really important that we have that power of making a choice. And I decided to ask about loss because when I've lost a lot of family members, and at one time it was like I don't feel like partying. I just feel like having some peace and quiet, and that's okay. That's
Absolutely.
okay. People will understand if
Yeah.
you can't make it to a gathering, and I've done that before, but again, for me it's a choice.
It's such an important choice, Blanca. And I'm going to say, fantastic. I'm so glad that you make that choice. And I want to just I'm glad that the people in your life have supported it and are understanding. Sometimes they aren't,
Right.
right? And sometimes others can be uncomfortable with with our grief or our own suffering. And
Mhm.
it can try and force a solution on us. Like, don't think about that. Don't spend time alone. You have to be with other people.
Right.
That's you are the authority on what you need,
Right.
right?
Right. You have a mind.
Yeah.
There's always that conflict that a lot of people have, I think, that to understand that we have a mind. It's not just our brain, we have a mind.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like two separate things.
Yeah.
And so we have to do what's best for us,
Yeah.
you
That's
know?
right. That's right. And it's not about excluding other people,
Right.
right? It's not about there's a tension. I'm really glad you brought this up because first of all, I'll just say I am an introvert. Okay. And what that means very simply is that generally speaking, two different kinds of people in the world, people who
Mhm.
are more introverted and people who are more extroverted. And
Right.
with that, as an introvert, that it doesn't mean that I don't love people. I love people. I just don't love them all at once. And so when we use that language, we're talking about where we get our energy from. So it's often the case that, so for people who are more introverted, we get our energy from solitude.
Mhm.
And when we're engaging with people, we can be happy and joyous and really deeply fulfilled, but where energy is leaving us as we
Yeah.
do that. Whereas for people who are more extroverted, that's where they get their energy. So my wife and I are a great example of this. My wife is quite extroverted. And the holiday season and the parties and the thing like the social occasions,
Right.
she really wants that. She wants
The
to have
hustle
those.
and bustle of the whole season.
Yeah, she wants to connect with people. And for me, what it looks like is often what I need is relaxation. What I need is time to myself. It gets again a little bit more complicated when we're suffering
Mhm.
because not showing up in ways that we normally would, like not going to social gatherings or not going to church or not going to connect with loved ones in their homes, or
Mm.
it can be an important piece of self-care. It can also be a way of avoiding experiences that might be a little complicated but also might actually be good for us. And
Mhm.
so we want to be discerning about, am I staying away from this because I'm going to get energy? Or am I staying away from this because I'm trying to curl up in a little ball and make the pain go away?
Mhm.
And that's, I think, an important distinction. We have to, for those who are grieving during the holidays, and I know plenty of people who are, I know people who have lost loved ones this year, and this will be the first holiday that they've been without them. And it is painful. And
Mhm.
and it is important to allow ourselves to feel that pain and to put ourselves in environments where feeling that pain is supported, right?
Mhm.
Like your friends and family do.
Yeah. I'm sure it probably is a little bit more difficult for people that have pre-existing mental health issues.
Yeah. So that's a great point. It depends on the pre-existing mental health issue, and it depends on how that it intersects with the holidays. So
Yeah.
if you, for instance, one of the things that will happen, so at my institution, we take a 2-week break, or we take a 1-week break, a little bit longer than 1 week between Christmas and New Year's. And then usually like I will add a week of vacation around that so I can get an extended time. Well, one thing that does is it takes away maybe some of the stress of the workplace, but it also can take away some of the structure that the
Mhm.
workplace provided and some of the regular human interaction that I
Mhm.
would have in a work week. And if I'm struggling with depression and if I tend to isolate when I'm depressed, that can actually make things worse, or it can take away a bit of structure that has been important for me to function. So when we do find ourselves struggling during the holidays, it's important to know it's important to know ourselves and what helps us when we're struggling. And it may be that what we need to do during the holidays is create some structure for
Mhm.
ourselves to replace the structure that a work life or a normal routine that is different from the holiday season would provide us.
I think a little bit of compassion
Yeah.
always works too. And that's really hard for a lot of people. They feel compassion for other people, but not for themselves. And that's, to me, I think that's really important to understand that you're okay. You deserve to have that compassion for
Yeah.
yourself.
I'm really glad that you named that, Blanca. There's the person who's most associated with the term self-compassion is a researcher here in Texas. She's at University of Texas. Her name is Kristen Neff, and she tells us that this is essential. And you're exactly right. It is countercultural, particularly I think for those of us who, whether because of how we were raised or the role that we seem that we have in society, are expected to or expect ourselves to be taking care of others all the time, right?
Mhm.
So maybe that we're the head of a household or we're a parent and we have children. And so it's our role to do that. Or it may be that we've just acquired it over time that we want to
Mhm.
spend all of our energy focusing on other
Mhm.
people. What often happens is that we lose the ability to do three things. And this is what from Kristen Neff's research. The first is rather than being judgmental about ourselves, that we're able to be aware and connected to what our human needs are, right? What is it that what to be caring with ourselves? And sometimes that's the language we speak to ourselves in our
Mhm.
heads, and or it's just the demands that we place on ourselves, and we say that we're failing if we don't meet those demands. So that's one. The second is to understand yourself as being the only one who's struggling, right? It's all on me. Everybody else seems to be doing just fine, but I'm the one who's really struggling and I have to hide that. Versus understanding that actually what you're struggling with is so many other people are struggling with it too. And what Kristen Neff calls this understanding that our common humanity, right? That we're
Mhm.
not alone when we're struggling.
Right.
And the third dimension of it is mindfulness, that we can lose ourselves in the million things, in all the presents that need to be wrapped, or all the cookies that need to be baked, or all the people that need to be hosted, or
Mm.
all the people we need to check in with, rather than being present in the moment as we're having these experiences. And when we do intentionally practice mindfulness, which is just intentional, non judgmental awareness of our
Mhm.
experience right now, then it makes our life much human sized and
Yeah.
manageable.
Yeah, sometimes we're harder on ourselves than other people are.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't, and it doesn't seem to be different for people in different cultures. It's like we all experience those same type of emotions. I think, I'm not sure, but I think that no matter what your culture is, you have those same human emotions.
Yeah, and I think on a fundamental level, that's true. It is interesting. There's some variations across cultures in terms of how people describe what they're feeling, how people name their emotion. Not to get too much in the detail, but I think it's important to talk about the difference between emotion and feeling. So, emotion is a label. Emotion is a name that I assign to an experience I'm having in my body, and it's a way of communicating about it. But the example I always use is anxiety, because anxiety is something I've experienced my whole life. And I don't feel anxiety. What I feel is my intestines going scrunch. And I start to sweat. Like, that's a physical
Yeah.
experience. Or the muscles in my back might tighten up, or muscles in my chest. Those are feelings, and those are universal. How we then name it and talk about it can change a bit from culture to culture.
Yeah. I didn't think about that. How these emotions make you feel physically as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's another system for navigating the world. It's actually what we've had from an evolutionary standpoint, we've had for much longer than we've had language, and that we've had rational thought. And it's a
Mhm.
very effective way of valuing our experience. Like, the body knows things that the mind, the cognitive, the rational mind has to piece together and needs sensory information for, but the body will sense it, right? The body
Mhm.
will, and so it's not good or bad, it's not right or wrong, but it is real
Mhm.
and can be very helpful.
So the body actually talks to us and says, "Hey, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
You need to take care of me."
That's right. Let me give you another. I always want to talk about anxiety, but let me give you another example of that, which is, and we were talking about grief earlier. I've had this experience recently, so I'm just going to talk about myself, where I was grieving something in my life. I was grieving a really significant loss, and I didn't really know it. I didn't have a name for it. But what I had was an experience of this aching in my head, like aching and it wasn't like a headache exactly. It was this, like, I knew what it was. It was, I needed to cry. Like, I needed to
Mhm.
cry. And as a man, we're socialized. That is, men never cry, and they certainly never cry in public, right? That
You're
isn't
supposed to be strong.
for us to be strong. It's exactly right. And so we're socialized. That's not okay. And also, I think there's some physiological elements to it as well, that men don't cry as easily as women do, more or less. This is generally speaking.
Yeah.
But once I realized that and was in a place where it broke through and I was able to cry, it released a tremendous amount of energy, and it also really, really relaxed me, right?
And
But the
brought peace
body
to
knew.
you.
Yeah, it brought peace to me. The body knew. The body knew what it
Yeah.
needed. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what worries me sometimes is that people that don't know how to handle their mental health issues, especially this time of the year, is that they react to it in extreme ways. Maybe they become violent, or maybe that's when they decide to, it's like, my life isn't worth living. I'm
Yeah.
just going to commit suicide and end it all, right?
Right.
But that's not what should happen.
Right. So Blanca, again, I'm so grateful for the points you're making. Let's talk about two different things. The first thing is domestic violence.
Yes.
It is well documented that during the holidays, domestic violence incidents increase. And often, again, it gets back to the coping strategies that we've had in everyday life, where people have had structured schedules where they're not actually spending time together if they're afraid of there being violence with an important person in the household who may be responsible for keeping us alive in some ways or making sure that we have money, but then is abusive. And so violence does go up during the holidays. And I want to be really clear to listeners that there are numerous resources. One of them, if you're listening in Houston, I highly recommend the Houston Area Women's Center, which will support you if you're dealing with domestic violence. And I also highly recommend 988. 988 is the mental health crisis, nationwide mental health crisis hotline. It happens that there are only, for the state of Texas, there are only a couple of the major call centers that handle everything for the state. One of them is here in Houston. It's run by the Harris Center, which is our local mental health authority, and 988. It's very simple. You can call that number and they will help. Toward what you were saying about suicide, yes, it has been documented, and it's not as big as the increase in suicidal acts is not as huge as sometimes we might fear it is. But
Yeah.
yes, there is an uptick over the holiday season. And I will say two things about it. I've already said one, which is if you're noticing yourself having those feelings, call 988, call family and friends, go to the emergency room, get help. Do not be alone.
Yeah.
The second thing I'll say is that that deep knowledge I was talking about with the emotions, right? The body knows things that we can't really adequately put into words, and sometimes it speaks in physiological symptoms. Sometimes it speaks in images. And we find ourselves imagining suicide, right? Imagining self-harm. We have to understand that is, in one sense, the mind's way of telling us that this life has to change, right? The way we're living has to come to an end, not our physiological, not our body, right? The body doesn't have to come to an end, but that we're suffering to such a degree that the situation in which we're suffering has to come to an end. And that's really important information. So for those who do notice themselves experiencing suicidal ideation or find themselves starting to think about a plan, for the most important piece is to connect with other people. And I would say connect with people who are going to be supportive of you. And that may not be somebody in your home, right?
Yeah. I think maybe sometimes people are embarrassed because they don't want people to have pity on them or think bad about them.
Right.
And so they don't reach out or tell anybody. But there's this number here that people can call, the 988, and they don't know who you are, but they might be able to help you with your situation.
They can definitely help, and they can connect you with resources, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I can't say enough about that good work that it does. And I'll also mention something else, Blanca. Like you talked about that experience of like yourself as being weak or not wanting to impose on other people. A lot of people understand that mental health is a sign of moral weakness. That is deeply embedded in our culture. It's been around for a very long time. And it is a huge problem. The first thing I'll say is that every mental health issue is also a biological issue. If you break your leg, you're going to go to the doctor. And if you're having suicidal ideation, you have to understand that's actually something that's also physiological. It's happening in your brain. It's happening in your body. It's also a physical experience and a physical illness, as well as what we call a mental illness. So we use mental illness as a way of talking about how we might approach treating it.
But a lot of us, I think we put on this mask to make us look good. We don't express our feelings because maybe we don't know how. And again, it's an individual thing.
Yeah. And really, I'm so glad you said because we really don't know how. And that is often the case because we don't have practice at it.
Right.
We've been told, and we may have grown up in an environment in which it's not okay to actually express what you're feeling, right?
Especially if you're a guy.
Yeah, especially if you're a guy, but not only if you're a guy, right? Women get messages too that their feelings are too much, right? Or they get in the way, or they are signs of weakness, right? And so learning how to be present with yourself, to get back to breathing and being aware that if you can notice what's happening in your body, you notice what you're feeling in your body, then you can that gets you closer to then being able to name that experience and express it. And I'll say one other thing, which is that often it's hard to put into words to another human being. It's easier for us to express it in another way. It might be easier to write in a journal about it. It might be easier to draw about it or paint. Like we don't have to be artists to do it, right? But to sit down and express what's going on within you can have very beneficial effects. And it can keep you from having to have that experience that might feel overwhelming of talking with another human being about what you're feeling, particularly if you're not used to that, right? If that's a new experience.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's social media. People tend to believe everything that's in social media sometimes. And so that doesn't help either.
Let me tell you how I feel about social media. I keep in mind, I am one of the little forms of self-care I have is my family and I send Instagram reels to each other, right? Or my son sends me TikToks, and like there's a lot of different experiences we can have through social media, but particularly around the holidays, I cannot tell you how many people, the thing about social media is that it is a highly curated and artificial picture of what other people's lives are like.
Right.
we do not post the most awful and embarrassing things that happen to us online, right?
Everybody looks good.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
we posting these specially, posed pictures of
Right.
ourselves with our families, and you'll know that right after that picture, dad got drunk or the
Yeah.
big fight broke out about politics among the two siblings, or like that stuff doesn't get posted. And
Yeah.
so people end up comparing themselves
Yeah.
to these social media presentations. The other side of social media is that it will inflame and intensify emotion as a way of keeping our attention. And so, yeah, I'm a big
And
fan.
also people tend to put down the people that are
Yeah,
watching them,
that's right.
and that just is so wrong.
And people get into fights with each other. It's very easy to be act in ways that are dehumanizing when you don't
Yeah.
have a relationship with the other person, right? When it's
Yeah.
somebody who's online.
Yeah, and also I think nowadays we have to be aware of AI as well.
Yeah.
That's not gonna help either.
Yeah, I say generally speaking, and I think I've heard a lot from people after the election, going into the election and after the election, who are struggling with the increasing intensity of emotion, like in a way it's disrupting their lives. And my advice, which I follow myself, is expose yourself to social media and also expose yourself to whatever source of news that you trust, only
Yeah.
in very limited amounts, only enough so that you get the information you need to be an informed citizen. I particularly have a problem with 24-hour news stations all across the board. I don't care about the
Yeah.
ideology. Across the board, they exist to try and keep you engaged, and all their broadcasting is giving you very little information and a
Mhm.
lot of opinion
Mhm.
that is inflaming so that you will
Yeah.
stay engaged with it. So, yeah, I think that the particularly 24/7 news media is a big mental health risk area.
Yeah. So basically we need to make sure that whatever we read, whatever we see, whatever we hear is or are positive messages,
Or
basically.
include them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And also, I think giving ourselves permission to be happy,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of people don't.
Right.
And it's that self care
Yeah.
that I think some people don't know how to do, how to give themselves. And
Yeah, yeah, and Blanca, I don't remember if we talked about this last time. I won't go on and on, but
right.
very strong feelings about self-care as well. And two quick opinions. One is self-care is essential. And it is, again, it's about paying attention to who I am and what my actual human needs are. And that seems like it would be the most fundamental thing that we would teach children, and it isn't. And so, yeah, self-care, which is intentionally meeting your emotional, physical, spiritual needs, is very important. The second thing I'll say though is that self-care was an invention of an extraordinary human being. She didn't know she was inventing it, but an extraordinary human being named Audre Lorde. And she was a beautiful poet and an activist working on behalf of Black women in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And she came to a point where she was trying to decide, she got a cancer diagnosis. She was trying to decide if she was going to just live out the rest of her life on her own terms without seeking treatment, or if she was going to take a step back and get treatment at a time when it was really expensive and it wasn't that, it wasn't that reliable. And as she was struggling with that, she wrote a sentence in her journal. She wrote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare." And out of that sentence, and I have a whole lecture about this. I won't go into it,
Yeah.
but what happened over time is that sentence was so impactful in the lives of people who were caring for and advocating for other people that they would repeat it again and again to remind themselves that they needed care too. And in the end, that sentence got shorted to self-care. And that's how it entered our language.
Mhm.
So self-care emerges as a way for people who are marginalized and oppressed to address the fact that the community is not adequately caring for them. And so we need more than self-care, right? We need self-care, and we need to be in communities of others who care for us.
And also, I think what I think is important is talking to your friends, making it like a normal conversation. Are you feeling okay? How are you doing? Are things going okay in your life?
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Trying to make sure that you're helpful in some way.
And
Supportive too.
we can have another conversation about this too, Blanca. I agree wholeheartedly. And there's also, I think, a skill, an art in learning how to be helpful without taking on too much of the other person's burden, right?
Mhm.
Ultimately, what we want in relationships, maybe not in one conversation or maybe not in a series, but generally in a relationship is one that is mutual and where we listen and we listen for what people listen and are able to share back what the person has said and how they feel about it. And we also need relationships where then that person will do the same for us. Again, there's sometimes we can assign ourselves the job of caring for other people and never actually be cared for ourselves.
Yeah. And definitely be sincere about it and listen. Listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
of
not,
course,
and not just wait to tell our story.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, also, if you know that you're having some issues, just go see a psychotherapist like you and also maybe get some medications that might be helpful.
Yes. And yeah, absolutely. Access mental health resources.
Yeah. Well,
We are here. Psychiatry can be helpful. Psychotherapy can be helpful. If it feels like that's a bit of a stretch to out the door, but if you have a faith community, you might go to your faith community and at least have conversations with your faith leaders about the experiences you're having. And
mm,
some faith communities are more supportive of mental health care than others. Yeah, but that's growing.
yeah. So, Sean, we're running out of time, and this has been really interesting. And I think we can go on and on. I have a ton of more questions to ask you, but maybe at another time.
Sounds good.
Also, people can go to the Jung Center and learn about themselves and go to these different classes that might be helpful. So, Sean, where can we call or for more information?
You bet. Our phone number, you're not going to get anybody tonight. That we're closed now,
Right.
but our phone
Right.
number is 713-524-8253. And our website is open 24/7. So you can go to our website too at junghouston.org. That's JUNG Houston.org. And we are closing out. We still have things that are happening in December. We'll be quiet. We'll sort of go quiet for about a month between middle December and middle January. And then we'll kick off in middle January with our spring semester. And
Yeah.
so you can learn all about those events on our website. And what we do is mental health education, but in a very broad way. We have a lot of classes on the
Right.
arts and the humanities and music and topics like this.
Yeah. And the center is located in the museum district.
We are, yeah. We're located right next door to the Contemporary Art Museum, 5200 Montrose Boulevard. And if you happen to come down to the museum district for some reason, please stop by. It's free to come in, and we always have new and interesting art exhibits that are open in the gallery, and we have a really cool bookstore as well. Particularly as you're heading toward holiday shopping, we've got a lot of interesting, unique, and gift ideas there too.
I might stop by there.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again for joining me and for giving us all this great information that will help us during the holidays with our mental health and letting us know where we can reach you if we need to. And of course, I'd like to thank everyone as well for joining me. And if you have any comments or you have any ideas for a show, please let me know. And I want to wish you a very happy holiday season. Take care of yourself, especially your mental health.
Thank you so much, Blanca. Take care.